Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Tuesday Theology. I'm excited to get the chance to share with you some thoughts this evening, and I hope that they are helpful for you. I want to start off today with this statement: neither adversity and failures nor peace and success in everyday life are any indicator of your actual spiritual well-being. This is what one author, G.K. Beale, has called restorative irony. Let's get started with a biblical perspective to help us kind of understand what we're talking about here. And the best way to do that, I think, is by comparing Adam with Jesus. Now, in Genesis chapter 1, as a part of the narrative surrounding creation, Adam is told that he is to fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, or birds of the heavens, rather, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. Now, later in Genesis chapter 2, he's told, "You may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it you shall surely die." Okay, so here we have two pretty simple, straightforward commands from God. Subdue the earth and have dominion over all creation, and don't eat from that one particular tree. Two commands, and ultimately two failures on the part of Adam, right? Remember that rather than having dominion over all the creatures of the earth, Adam and Eve actually allow one of those creatures to have dominion over them, leading them to then eat from the tree which was also forbidden. So Adam's actions ultimately resulted in the exposure of mankind to sin and death. Now, in contrast to that, Jesus' actions resulted in just the opposite. While Adam's eating of the fruit of this tree meant death, Jesus actually instituted a meal by which all Christians still today eat and remember the blessing of life that has been gained as a result of Jesus and his actions. But what I find really compelling is the comparison that we can make between Adam and Jesus, especially in light of what is said in Galatians chapter 3 by the Apostle Paul. Listen to what he says about what Jesus did. He says, "Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us. For it is written, 'Cursed is everyone who is hanged on a tree.'" Now think about that for just a minute. Adam and Eve saw a tree that looked great. It looked very appealing. It appeared as though it was a tree that was good for food, the Genesis account says. In other words, this tree appeared as though it was a tree that was going to sustain life. But, as you and I know, it did just the opposite, right? It brought about death and destruction. Meanwhile, as we read in Galatians chapter 3, Jesus was also hung on a tree. But it was a very different kind of tree. One that was seen by everyone as a curse. That old rugged cross, as the song says, it was not a nice couple of 2x8s that had been sanded and treated and then nailed together or anything like that. Nothing about the way the cross looked or appeared would have been appealing. Much less would anything about the way it was used have been appealing. Everything about the cross declared death to this world, declared a curse to this world. And yet that is the very tool used by God and by His Son to bring about new life for mankind. Jesus appeared to have failed. Jesus appeared to be nothing more than a charlatan. And yet, in that failure, He did more for you than you could ever do for yourself. Now, think about how you define success or how you define failure. Usually it's based on physical outward appearances, right? If someone drives a nice car or has a nice house, or if someone is running a financially profitable business, or if someone shows up in person to every worship service, every time the doors are open, they're at worship, or they're at the church meeting. These are the kinds of things that we are very likely to notice and, as a result, tag a person as successful. But a person could do any one of these things, or a person could do all of those things and still be a failure spiritually. They could still be morally and spiritually bankrupt. Meanwhile, someone who has very little in this life, someone who goes basically unnoticed by the crowds, someone who doesn't give a lot to the church but gives what they can, that individual might actually be far more successful because God honors the unseen, the spiritual qualities of an individual. And what we need to remember is that in eternity, God is not going to reward us based on what the world sees as valuable or successful. We're going to be rewarded based on what God values and what God honors. So this week I want you to ask yourself this question: what do I value? What do I consider to be a success? And consider whether or not your answers to those questions line up with what God values and what God deems as successful. I hope that this time has been useful for you, and I hope that you continue to grow in your knowledge and understanding of the Word of God and God's will for your life. I hope that you have a wonderful evening and look forward to seeing you soon.